Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between. Today's guest reached out to me, and then I reached right back out to her and said, can we do a podcast swap? Sandra Champlain is someone that I've been following for a long time. She is the #1 best-selling author of the book We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery to Life After Death, and the host of We Don't Die Radio and Shades of the Afterlife. And her We Don't Die Radio was something that I found years ago when I was searching for who else has podcasts in this space, but I was too timid and afraid to reach out to her and ask her if she'd either want to appear on my podcast or I could appear on hers. So I'm so excited to bring you this episode because Sandra comes at this work from a similar place that I do. She kind of came at it almost like a journalist, very curious, but also very skeptical, and then started having these experiences when she followed this path that really made her a believer. And so I'm so excited to share her story with you today. We're going to touch on EVPs, which is electronic voice phenomenon, which is, as you all know, something that we've never talked about before. And I always like to bring you new material. So I think you're going to be fascinated by this episode. If you do try EVP, I'm contemplating trying it. Let me know how it goes. I'm really curious. But with that, here's today's episode with Sandra Champlain. Welcome, Sandra, to Life, Death, and the Space Between.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so great to be with you, Amy.
It's so incredible to have you on because you're someone I've admired for so long. Your work was sort of the first, you started before podcasts were really podcasts with We Don't Die Radio. And so can you tell us your journey? Because you talk about this with something that I had never heard of before, this EVP. So
I sure will.
Lead us through your journey.
All right. First of all, I'm the author of the book, We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death. And why that's important and why I think I'm a good messenger for this message is because I never believed in this. I would laugh at people in a bookstore that were in the New Age or spirituality section thinking there's no evidence of life after death or guides or any of that. So I'd feel sorry for people. I was very closed-minded. But it was in the mid-90s. I had a fear of death that just took me over. I wasn't sick or anything, but I just couldn't put my head on the pillow at night without thinking, what would happen? What else is there? And so it very secretly got me on this journey of looking for a reason to believe that we go on. So I studied science and medicine, spirituality, churches. I grew up in the Catholic faith. And while faith is good, it didn't quench that fear of dying. Mm-hmm. And as time went on, I ended up meeting a friend who was a nurse. I met her at a seminar, and she was really big into angels and fairies and mediums. And I really liked this lady. She was a great friend, but I just thought this side of her was a little nuts, right? And she ended up giving me a deck of angel cards. And at the time, I had run with my mom an over 30-year business, a catering business. We cooked for race car teams. And unfortunately, in 2020, COVID hit, we lost the business. That's another story. Mm-hmm. But while I was at these races, I would just for fun pull out one of these angel cards, assuming every card in the deck would have something that would apply to life, right? That's right. Just how I feel. Yeah. But the weird thing is 8 out of 9 days, I got the exact same card, which was the card that said music. And typically when I work, we work real hard. I don't have music on in the background. It's just a distraction. But on that week, I decided to have the radio on. Just why not? I started having what I would call our psychic experiences. I would know the names of the songs. I would hear them in my head before they'd come on the radio. Sometimes the radio would be off and I'd hear an Elvis song and exactly what it was. And then all of a sudden I turned on the radio and there it was. So when I got back from that trip, I contacted this lady, Nancy, and I said, there's more to this than meets the eye. And so we ended up going on a weekend retreat, and we saw a famous medium at the time. And I was convinced that anybody who got a reading, they were like plants in the audience and that she was going to try to sell books or something. But I didn't experience that. It was a very low price seminar. People got genuine communication that just moved them to tears. And I thought, she's not trying to sell anything either. Mm-hmm. So I took that, and now you got to combine that with that fear of dying. And I decided to take a trip to California. I live on the East Coast, just south of Boston, Massachusetts. And I flew under the radar because now people know me as skeptic on all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I took a 3-day class in mediumship. And the promise was, if you attend that course, you're somebody who can accurately tell the deceased people around others. And so
wait, that was the guarantee. They guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
Or your money back. It sounds like an infomercial, right?
Exactly. And it's interesting because now, so many years later, we all have that soul potential. We run our own medium classes and everybody can do it, with the training. Right. But on that specific weekend, before we learned too much, the leader had said, we're going to just do a little practice for when it's time to do the medium reading. She says, I just want to show you how it goes. And she says, everybody pick a partner. And of course, I knew nobody there. And she says, just create a bubble of light and love around you. I'm like, I can do that. And she says, I want you to make up that there's a person standing behind your partner and tell the story. Is it a man? Is it a woman? You might feel the relationship. And because this was make-believe, and I was told I was making this up, there was no fear of being wrong. Okay. So,
which I think is a huge thing, right? There's no fear of being wrong. Because I think that's what holds so many of us. I know certainly for me, holds us back from.
Correct. We have to be willing to be wrong and just use our imagination. And anytime we think, oh, I've got to get it right, we got the left brain and the right brain and one side shuts down and all that. But in this case, I went first because I was just making it up, closed my eyes. And behind this woman, I just imagined that her grandfather on her mom's side was standing behind her. I got the name Jan, that he was a fisherman in Denmark, see him puffing away on a cigarette, and then said he died of lung cancer. And then she says there's often a message that comes through. And I said, he never told your mom, his daughter, that he loved her. He wants you to pass on the message. So blonde hair, blue eyes, really sunburned skin and big gap between his teeth, Jan, Denmark. So I opened my eyes, Amy, and I got every detail correct about her grandfather. Everything. Died of lung cancer, name, Denmark, everything. And she was crying. And I had one of those holy cow moments. Like,
right.
What
holy
is
cow
this?
Or holy something else?
Something else. I remain PG for interviews. And so she turned and she did the same thing with me and clearly described my grandfather, that German Shepherd he had, that he walked with a cane, some of his history and all that. So that opened the door to me that there's so much more. And like that urge to know that we go on started to get quenched. Like, okay, there's something to this. Now that weekend, like we had said, when we start analyzing and we start thinking, can we do this? Every time I put pressure on myself to try to give a medium reading, I was wrong. Every time I said, you know what, this isn't going to work anyways, I'm just going to go for it. All of a sudden I was right. So very interesting. So I left that conference.
So what did you ask the medium what that was about?
Yeah.
Do you have a sense?
Absolutely. I have a sense. We have to be free with our imagination. Our soul, that's how our soul perceives information, is through our imagination. When we put stress on it and when we try to figure things out, that shuts down the flow. Mm-hmm. So, and I've done things like remote viewing and ESP work, and it all works the same way. Be willing to be wrong. Just have love in your heart for the person you're working with, and then just share what comes to mind. So it's
simple.
It sounds simple. Mm-hmm. However, when you start actively trying to practice mediumship or take a class, that's the first thing that comes up is I'm not good enough. I can't do this and all of that. So it's just setting,
as you say, the voice, right? You call it the voice in your book.
That is that voice. It's ego, identity, doesn't want to look bad, that sort of thing. So when
I think especially in this work, this has been one of my hang-ups too, is it feels like sacred work in many ways. And I don't think it's something we want to be wrong about. One, because there's so many people who are skeptics, and a lot of people who do it, they want to make money. I don't think that's necessarily their like full intent, but sometimes it is. And I think it's, I think of it as in many ways grief work.
It most definitely is grief work. If you get a really good medium reading, and they don't have to cost a lot of money. I always tell people, make sure you book a medium who's got a 10-minute guarantee, that if in that first 10 minutes you're not getting what you're looking for, it comes to an end. Because sometimes, like tuning a radio channel, you just can't tune in. And sometimes that happens.
Right.
It happens. So always make sure that the mediums have that. And somebody once said that a medium reading shouldn't cost any more than a good haircut. And I like that.
Well, these days, good haircuts getting expensive.
Well, they could, but you can also go to a supercut. So there's mediums for everybody, but just make sure they have that 10-minute guarantee. Anyways, I leave that weekend, and I know in my heart, like I'm really starting to open up that there's so much more. And I wasn't yet ready to tell anybody about this, because that fear is so prevalent that if people knew I took a class in mediumship, they'd say, well, who do you see around me? And then I would be wrong, and then I would be laughed at, and I would lose friends and family, right?
And so credibility
Yeah. And at this point, I didn't tell anybody I was interested in this. People knew me as a disbeliever. What I did is I went to a Barnes & Noble bookstore, and I thought somebody must have some advice to be a little bit better at this mediumship so that I could be right more often. And I see this bright orange book on the shelf called The Idiot's Guide to Communicating with Spirits. I thought
an idiot's guide for everything.
For me. Yep. Written by Reverend Rita Berkowitz. And so as I was reading it, it was not only a story of communication with spirit, but this lady, Reverend Rita, is also a spirit artist. So she's a medium, and she'll draw a portrait of the person she sees with you. Mm-hmm. And so throughout the book, there's pictures and pictures and pictures of people as they lived and her drawings, and they're the same people. I thought, oh my gosh, that's great. I turned to the end of the book. Oh, and she also talks about the religion of spiritualism, which is just a lovely service. But at the end, the minister is also the medium and does medium readings for the congregation. So I thought, where does one find one of these spiritualist churches? Well, no kidding. And I couldn't be making this up. When I turned to the back of the book, her church was 45 minutes away from where I lived.
Of course it was, right?
Yes. So I went there a couple of times, and one of the times that I went there was a couple at the end. Instead of doing a demonstration of mediumship, they talked about something called EVP, electronic voice phenomena. And they had a tape recorder, and they said that they both had deceased children from previous marriages. They put a small tape recorder in one of their rooms in the house with a fan playing in the background for noise. And then they left the house. And then they said, after 20 minutes, we came back in, and this is what we heard. And they played it. And it was sounds of little kids laughing. And Mommy, Daddy, don't be scared. We're still here with you. Yeah, I do too.
What's the purpose of the white noise in the background?
In a recorder, we got to record the sound of something. They say those in the spirit world rearrange the sound to turn them into voices. So they need some kind of material. Like an artist needs paint in which to paint. They need to have some kind of sound and able to. I
don't know if you probably can't see it. It's like straight up goosebumps.
I might get you a little bit more with this next story. So anyways, okay. I think to myself, if I was bold enough to figure out how EVP works, then I could start telling people about what I've learned. Because throughout this time, you have to know I met so many people who had lost a loved one. And I was too chicken to share about my medium experience. So my soul, I will call it that, was saying, Sandra, you got to tell people about this because it has an opportunity to really help heal people. And give
Now,
people
was this
hope.
something you heard or just felt?
I just
and knew?
felt it. I just felt it. And then there was that little voice in my mind that says, if you ever do write a book, of course, you're not smart enough to write a book. My little voice.
The voice, yeah.
Never shuts up. But I also always knew it would be titled We Don't Die. Like it just was always there. So I decide to start recording. And there's a book called There Is No Death and There Are No Dead by Tom and Lisa Butler. So I got the book, got the recorder. And in a nutshell, I scared the heck out of myself because good Catholic girl, what am I doing playing with this? I remember being a kid playing records backwards and hearing voices. And I thought, we're going too far, right?
So you were always a bit curious too, right?
I was.
If you were a kid. Okay.
I was. So fast forward many, many, many months. I was working my butt off with catering. I was burnt out. And I know there's a beautiful retreat center in upstate New York called the Omega Center, offering great foods and nature walks and massages. And I said to myself, I don't care what's there that weekend, I'm going to go. Because they always have classes going on.
Right.
Art classes and, spiritual classes. I'm going to go. So the only weekend I had free, Tom and Lisa Butler were there for their first and only time there teaching electronic voice phenomena.
Talk about synchron, right? Like you can't, this is just the nature when you start to step into this space of really recognizing how the universe just shows up, spirit, soul, source, whatever you want to call it. It just gives you what you need in that way.
They say when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But these were some giant size breadcrumbs that I was following. And so again, under the radar, the only person that knew that I was attending this on EVP was the cab driver that brought me from the airport.
Oh, you talk about that in the book.
I told everybody that I was going to like a business retreat. Anyways, over the course of the 3 days there, Tom and Lisa Butler are both spiritualist ministers. They were the ones who ended up talking to a Hollywood studio about White Noise, which ended up becoming a horror movie, even though they said the only messages that come through are humor and love. But it made a big movie, and thankfully it brought a lot of attention to EVP being a real thing, but they were horrified that it became a horror movie.
Right. But I get it. I think people are scared. I think that's what on some level prevents people from really believing and what religions say about it. And
yes,
connecting.
Absolutely. They gave plenty of examples. There's different kinds of recordings, type A, B, and C. And A was loud and clear. You can hear it. And then B and C is kind of like, is it this? Is it that? Your mind tries to make words from sounds, which is just a normal thing. Our minds try to make pictures out of clouds, and on a piece of toast, somebody could see the Virgin Mary, right? Like our mind
on the
does
wall
that.
under in Chicago, there was a viaduct where it looked like the Virgin Mary, and people were showing up in droves to leave flowers and
There's something called pareidolia, I believe it's called, and that's just the brain wants to make faces and also make words out of sounds we hear. So it's not that it couldn't have been the Virgin Mary and Jesus and all that, but we also have to look, is it our mind putting that together? So that's a very real thing. So if you get a class A EVP, that is loud and clear, and there's no mistaking it.
So you literally hear like, I'm here.
Yes, you do. And I love you. I totally believed everything I heard in this weekend retreat. There were only 5 of us students with the 2 teachers, small group. And everybody there had lost a significant loved one. Me, not so much. I had grandparents, aunts and uncles, but at that point, nobody close to me. And since then, yes, I have. The last evening, course was going to end on Sunday. On Saturday night, I brought my tape recorder into the cabin that I was staying at. I was in it by myself. It was pouring rain, beautiful retreat center, nothing scary about it. And I held out my little digital tape recorder. And I imagined my aunt and uncle, my grandmother and grandfather at the foot of my bed. And I said, if you guys are here and this is real, and I'm supposed to help people believe in life after death, I said, you need to talk really loud so I can capture it on my recorder. Mm-hmm. So I recorded for just 1 minute the sound of raindrops. And when it was over, I played it back. I didn't have a computer to boost the sound or headphones to, make a loop and keep listening. And lo and behold, well, I said, I'm going to let this record for a minute and then I'm going to say goodnight. Those are my last words. On the recording, it says, good night, Sandra, in a man's voice. 2 women whisper, good night, good night. And then a male's voice says, good night. That was it. That was it. That took me from believing to knowing. But not only that, I wish I had all this comfort. That kind of scared me because all of a sudden I'm thinking, you hear this veil between this life and the afterlife. Mm-hmm. I started thinking, are there people with me right now? Are there always people with me? Do we have any privacy? So I went to bed that night excited, but also freaked out.
Do you still have the recording?
I do. I do have the recording. And after that, I brought it to class the next day. And by nature of me getting this recording, all the other folks that were there, the hope that they got and the comfort that this is real and how it impacted their grief was something that all of a sudden I'm thinking, this is it. This is it. This is how I move forward. And I never charged anybody, but I did a ton of experiments with people in my life, with family members. I had the courage to tell them about the medium class. I always liked to go to seminars and things on different things just to learn. Mm-hmm. But I would meet people and their loved one had just passed. And I would start sharing about this. And so we would end up going into one of the hotel rooms and putting on the shower for the background noise. But we heard so many messages and people heard them. And I had the courage at that time to tie it in with while we're looking for your sister, right? While we're trying to do this recording, what do I see in my mind's eye? So one gentleman I was working with, I didn't know who had passed. And he just said he had a loved one who had passed. And in my mind, I'm seeing this dark-haired girl with little pigtails and little braids and a little gap between her teeth, just super, super cute. And I felt like it was a sister. So we did the recording and we hear, hello, Billy. Remember the game we used to play? Remember Clue?
Wait, she said all of that?
All of that.
And this is on a what kind of recorder? I'm
just
curious.
Like a digital, the small digital tape recorders. You don't have them so much anymore. They still make them, but people normally use their iPhones and stuff to.
And you can hear it on that, like it does. I'm just thinking those recorders used to be like a little scratchier.
They have the higher quality ones. Yeah, okay. I had paid. I don't even know what at the time.
This is like the skeptic in me. I'm like, is this really?
Sure.
Oh
well, that's just it. The skeptic in me did so many of these. Right. And come to find out, this man, his little sister had died. She fit the description. And they used to play Clue. And I've got a bunch of those kind of stories that it just helped heal hearts. And so I got what I needed.
I think, sorry to interrupt, but I think in some ways, even different than a medium reading, and this is always why I think it's better to cultivate your own relationship with loved ones who have died than have a medium reading. Not that there's not value in that, but when you have the experience, it becomes undeniable. Correct. I think when you go into these medium readings, oftentimes you can have an amazing reading that blows your mind. And then and this still happens even in my own experience with my own self, but less so because you're not like, oh, well, did they really say that? Or am I misremembering it? Or maybe they could tell by my facial expressions that yes, I was validating something versus, they're hearing a voice that is so directly and clearly their loved one communicating with them with a validated message, it becomes undeniable.
Absolutely, it does. And like you said, it's nobody can tell. You need to have that experience yourself to really know. You do. And so I had all of that, and my heart was happy. That fear was rested. I wish I could tell you that I got all the EVPs and medium work and that I went on to tell everybody about the afterlife, but I didn't. I still had that little voice saying, who's going to listen to me? And I got very busy in life. Our business took us all over the United States. We worked almost every week of the year. And so that side of me just kind of got put on hold. It's somewhere in my mind, it was a someday thing, but not for right now. But I did take good notes at everything that I experienced. So fast forward about 5 or 6 years to 2010, my poor dad gets diagnosed with cancer. He was in Daytona Beach, Florida. They gave him last rites. It was a very scary time. Now, he didn't die right then and there, but we did find out that he had cancer and he went through chemotherapy and radiation. He had a tumor that broke apart part of his spine. And now my dad was peak physical fitness, even at the age 74. He had ridden his bicycle 3 times across the United States for charity. And my dad was fit.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. And what a good guy. He would help cancer patients and AIDS patients. And he had cancer himself 30 years before that. And he was one of those miracle healings that you hear about, mind over matter, all that. Anyways, in the next several months, Dad ended up passing in May, 5 months later of that year. But during that time, I was the kid that stayed by my dad's side. Everybody else was married with kids. Because of my flexibility with catering, I was able to relocate to Florida and then also relocate when my siblings moved him to Connecticut, which is where they lived. And that's where he passed. But in that time, it was brutal. I didn't know there was a thing called anticipatory grief. I didn't know the world of grief and how it can rip apart families. I didn't know that our brain chemistry changes and that we perceive information differently than it's happening. I didn't know about the fear, the anger, all those kind of things tied in. And
well, you never had a reason to, one.
Never.
And we're talking so much more about grief now.
Yeah, exactly. And in that time, it was very, very high stress over the care of my dad, my relationships with my siblings. We were never like close, but we were never going to be one of those families that fought if a parent died. We had that agreement. And that's exactly what ended up happening to us. And before my dad passed, Amy, I felt in my heart that I needed to tell my dad about my investigations into the afterlife. And my dad was very Catholic. He went to school. He went to Catholic mass every single day, every day. And I thought, I got to tell Dad. And so as weird as it might have sounded, Dad looked at me with these big eyes, big brown eyes, like, okay. And during that time I was sharing with him, out of the blue, I see a yellow airplane with black letters, Piper Cub is what it's called. And I hear a man laughing in my mind saying, tell your dad he was wrong. I did get to bring my toys with me. Bizarre. So I ended up telling my dad what I saw in that message. And my dad started to cry. Dad was always championing people that they can beat their illness. And he had a friend named Jim who had that airplane, and he would ride a bike with Jim almost every day. And he said, Jim, you can beat this because you don't get to bring your toys with you when you die. And Dad then said, Sandra, tell me everything. So I told him about the EVP and everything. And it was Dad who made me promise that I tell people about this. He says, you write a book and you help people. Promise me.
Oh,
yeah. And Dad ended up passing on May 11th of 2010. And it was not only losing my dad, but unfortunately, things got so bad with my siblings that I lost those relationships. And it set me into a rock bottom depression. And I was not going to end my life. I didn't contemplate ending my life, but I felt that pain that told me, I get it. I get why people would end their life. I get it, because nothing had ever felt as worse. Like, I can't breathe.
Well, and it's so interesting because as you talk about your journey, what you talk about is you went on this journey as a way to really deal with your existential crisis, right? What happens when we die? And this fear of nihilism, like there's nothing else. And here you are, really for the first time, facing a real close death, right? I mean, and it brought you to your knees, even though you had this belief system.
Right.
And it was about so much more than that.
Yeah. Even the mediums you meet and talk to, they have millions of miracles that they've witnessed and messages that they bring. But when we are a human being, we grieve. And it did help some.
Well, it sounds like you were grieving more than just, I mean, it was.
Oh, I was. I was grieving for the loss of my siblings, not being able to see the children, losing my dad. And the more we love, the more it hurts. Mm-hmm. It's awful. One of the good things that I did is I booked a reading with that Reverend Rita, who does the spirit art that I had told you about. And she drew a picture of my dad looking about how he did when he was in the Air Force in his 20s. And she says, honey, we get to be the best age when we pass. And that was really comforting. And she also brought through words that Dad and I shared, that there's not a living soul that could know. And that really helped. Mm-hmm. But in this time, Amy, that's when I went on this exploration of what grief is, why it hurts so bad, what would take healthy relationships and make this happen, why there was so much anger. We were fighting about things that didn't even happen. And what I tell people is, when you imagine somebody is addicted to a drug and that you take them off of it, they go through withdrawal. When we love somebody and somebody dies or a relationship ends, it's a different kind of withdrawal. We call it grief, but our system has to regenerate itself. There's these neurotransmitters that are running through our system, serotonin and dopamine and things. And we go through a very unhealthy drop in those. And that's why we can't sleep, or we sleep too much. That's why the anger is there, and, these repetitive feelings of guilt. But the big eye opener was that we can perceive the occurring world in a way that it's not really happening. So that's when I thought, we're fighting about things that aren't really happening. And I'm grateful I got this information, because I went on to writing my book and all of that. And it's saved some sibling relationships, which I'm thrilled. There's been so many people who have shared it as a parent is aging, saying, listen, we need to know this is coming. Mm-hmm. So that made a difference. And so in that time, it helped me. I created a free audio called How to Survive Grief. I posted it on YouTube and on Facebook, and it went rather viral. And what made me decide that it is time to write the book is, not only did people write me that it helped them understand grief, it helped ease their pain, etc., but there were several people who said they chose not to kill themselves because they listened to it. They said it was like you knew exactly what I was feeling and my thoughts in my brain. And then, just like those breadcrumbs appeared for the EVP, suddenly I get invited to a weekend retreat about writing a book. I had a chance occurrence of meeting somebody who was a publisher, had the courage to pitch my idea. I didn't know how to write. And the publisher said, write 2 chapters, what you think is your best. But he says, write it to me, like you're talking to me, because anytime you write or anytime you read, you're just talking one-on-one to a reader, So that's what I did. And he said, how soon can you have the rest written? And in 3 months I had We Don't Die, A Skeptic's Discovery of Life After Death written. They published it. And the world started opening up. I would go on some big radio shows and TV shows, and people would begin to read, and it helped. Yeah.
Well, and it's so interesting. I'm as I told you before we started, I've taken the show on the road this weekend. So I'm actually in DC right now at this conference for Mental Health America. And I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Lisa Miller, who is doing a ton of research on spirituality and how it changes our brain. And one of the things, kind of the thread of this conference so far has been not intentionally, but one of the themes that I keep hearing is the importance of sharing your story, because you never know how your story is going to impact someone else, how it might be that lifesaver that does save their life because it gives them hope. And I think that that's what this book does in so many ways and it's, first of all, I loved the part in the book where you quote different people on death and you talk about how like Abraham Lincoln had spiritualists at his house and he predicted his own death. Like he had a premonition about that. And that was so fascinating to me. But you really walk through all these different ways that we have proven that there is an afterlife. So why do you think so many people still say not true?
There's a couple things. One is I think our human mechanism is designed to play this game called life. I know there's an afterlife or a before life, a much bigger picture, and that maybe we all make an agreement that we're going to come here to learn to explore that we need to have a negative to feel the positive. And if we go to this afterlife or before life and it's all good all of the time, there's only so far our soul can grow. So maybe we make an agreement, Amy, that we come here forgetting who we really are. And we'll get maybe little reminders, but to really play the game called life, our soul needs to experience as much diverse emotions and experiences as possible in order for us to grow. And every single human being, I'm sure, can look back in their life and some of the worst times gave them that growth, that spiritual growth, or became the catalyst for them to be able to help another person. You know, we need to be on our own journey to impact another. And I think being of service to others is so valuable. The other thing I think is that we human beings have a need to be liked and loved and be part of a community. And we are not yet at the tipping point hasn't fully occurred, although I think we're on it, where people will embrace the reality of the afterlife. You know, there was a time where people thought the world was flat. There was a time that people thought the earth was the center of the universe. There was a time where people believed that you couldn't get an airplane into the air. Like that's impossible. It'll never happen. Even the Wright brothers, who successfully flew their first flight and many flights after, people still laughed at them that it was impossible. But now we have air travel, and most of our economy is based on being able to have planes.
And we're going to outer space.
Correct. And so it's become the norm.
Right.
And so that I feel in my gut is going to happen with the afterlife. I now, between We Don't Die Radio, and I was asked 4 years ago to do a show on iHeartRadio with the Coast to Coast AM people, and it's called Shades of the Afterlife. Between my two podcasts, I now have over 650 episodes, all dedicated to reasons to believe in the afterlife. And with that, you don't need to have your own near-death experience, because who wants one? You're going to go be in pain probably and something bad's going to happen.
Right.
But you can have those experiences. If you want to try things like EVP, you can, but you don't even have to go that far. There's what's called automatic writing or inspired writing, talking to your loved ones. There's taking medium classes and psychic classes, not because you want to be a medium, but because the magic that happens in those breakout rooms, like you and I are looking at each other through a computer right now. But if I started talking about your loved ones and then you started talking about mine, that is so comforting. And you realize that you're so much more than just this body, right? That we really are a soul having a human experience. And our loved ones can come through in just such gentle ways. You could be doing something, whatever your mind is on, and then all of a sudden, a memory will come in of a vacation you took with your loved one. Those are all little calling cards saying, hey, I'm right here with you. You know, every Sunday 2:00 Eastern time, we do a free, what's called a Sunday gathering. It's an inspirational, non-denominational service on Zoom. Anybody can attend. The last 45 minutes is a medium demonstration, working with people that are there. And every week I get to stay in this magic because I see people being united with their loved ones and how close they really are. So why the day hasn't come yet that the world as a whole believes in the afterlife is, I just think that tipping point hasn't occurred. But there's so many different reasons to believe in the afterlife. I mentioned near-death experiences. There's some verifiable information, tons of it.
Even kids that have had report past lives.
Oh, tons of it. And then one of my most favorite things is to hear about deathbed visions. Christopher Kerr, the hospice doctor, studied about 1,700 patients. And they have these dreams, but they don't occur as dreams. It's as real as you and I talking right now. And before they pass, within a few weeks, their loved ones are there looking young and healthy. It's not due to medication or anything people are on. And so often they tell them they're going to go on a trip. Get ready, you're going to go on a trip. So nobody dies alone. And there's so many verifiable stories of people that didn't even know their loved ones had passed. And they're saying that they're there to greet them. Some work of the great Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and others. So there's so much, but it's having people ingest this information, be curious, go on your own adventure, listen to podcasts, read good books, maybe attend a seminar, dabble in mediumship just to experience how your soul operates. Because when we know that the reality is there of the afterlife, or we know it most of the time, because like I said, we're designed to forget who we really are. Even me, you'd think, okay, it's 27 years I've been studying this. I wake up in the morning forgetting it all. I'm dealing with my own crud that's going on in life.
The human existence.
Yep. But then it doesn't take
Which
long.
is the reason why the soul's here, is to live this human existence, right?
Exactly. But it is a beautiful thing to have that reminder and put it all into perspective, because when we can embrace the reality of death and the afterlife, we get to live life without that fear. There's certainly going to be fear. No, I don't want to die, right? I'd still want to live. But do I believe in the afterlife? Do I believe my loved ones are here supporting me? Yes. So can I live a more fulfilled life, a more courageous life? Can I be more forgiving? Can I have more self-love? Yeah, absolutely. And there's such a nice quality of life by believing in the afterlife. So it's just a matter of time. And I think that tipping point's coming. And I'm going to keep on keeping on, as I know you are with the podcast.
Yes, exactly. And you and I think, speak very much the same language, that there is a quality of life that comes with this knowledge, with this belief, with this knowing that allows you to live more freely and have more fun and play more with the magic of this world. And that's not to say that when hardships come your way, they're still not hard, because they are, but they're a different type of hard. I think it doesn't kind of take you out with that same level of intensity.
Yeah. It's like you have tools that you can use to pull oneself out. Yeah.
So Sandra, if people want to know where to find you, I know they can find you all over podcasting with your We Don't Die podcast, but where else can they find you? You said iHeartRadio if they want to buy your book.
Yeah, WeDon'tDie.com is the one-stop source for everything.
It very simple.
Simple. You can find our free Sunday gathering. You can find my book. You can find the 2 podcasts. I always recommend We Don't Die Radio on my YouTube channel, because you get to see us talking. The first many episodes were just the audio, but then video came around.
Right. Then we all got hip to the video.
That's right. And then Shades of the Afterlife truly is my pride and joy, because there could be different topics within one episode of the latest and greatest and who's doing what. And I love it. I love it. So just your favorite podcast app, you can type in Shades of the Afterlife. And if any of your followers want a free copy of my book, a PDF, just go to WeDon'tDie.com, scroll down to the bottom. There's enter your name and your email address. It says you get the first few chapters. Here's the thing. It's the whole book. Because chapter 10 is how to survive grief. And I think it's the most important chapter. And I don't want to force anybody to buy a book, but I do want you to read that information because it's only a matter of time, whether you're experiencing grief or it'll come in the future. And I want to give people the tools so that no other relationships come apart and that you have some compassion for who you are and what it is you're going through.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Sandra. And I'm so excited to flip the script here, which we're going to do next week. So excited about switching roles. I always love to be
on my show.
Both sides of the mic. So we will continue this conversation from the other side next week. I'm not sure whose will air first, but we'll maybe we can time it and drop them on the same week or something.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.